Welcome to day 5 of our retreat, Being Faithful on the Journey. We've had a couple days to be and to listen deeply, to just be with ourselves and the God within. And we've taken some days to ponder what it means to be faithful. What have you been noticing? Again, what have you been listening to within and around you, and what have you heard? What is the genuine sounding like in you? Have you heard your name whispered in these days? Beloved, beloved, beloved. Both the world without and the world within, the earth around and the wilderness within, have cycles and seasons, light and dark, life and death. Things come together and things fall apart. And being faithful on the journey is about being with all of that and the interplay between our inner life and the outer world. And we're called to take responsibility for the fact that we co-create with God and with the rest of creation the reality in which we live. So we've wandered our inner earth with the invitation to listen deeply to the genuine in us, to trust the seed of God in us will grow into God if we make ourselves available, if we lean into that calling. Has it soaked into your soul and into your earth that you are beloved and that you've been chosen to love and to go out and bear fruit? I grew up in the mountains of Alaska, and in my youth, I always thought when I grow up, I want to be a hermit. Well, that didn't happen. I am definitely a person that's lived in relationships and community, but I know in time that I'm called to be a person with and for others, and I still have my hermit heart. We are part of a complex web of relatedness, and we need both solitude and community simultaneously to both bring our unique identity and one that is bound up with all of humanity and creation. And when speaking about solitude, I don't necessarily mean living separate from others, but never living separate from ourselves, from always taking the time and awareness to be with ourselves. I know some Trappist monks who I've learned a bit from about living community and connectedness, even as their lives are very much in a way hidden and excluded from the world. Community doesn't mean living necessarily right with others, but living with a deep awareness that we are interconnected, that we're part of a fabric of life together. We actually share life. And I think sometimes we just forget that. And I think in our world today, we can see the signs of that. To be on the journey of life is to be awake to the reality that we have a deep kinship with all of creation. I become more fully myself when I am awake and connected faithfully to others. Many spiritual traditions have stories or images about this interconnectedness of life. And I've appreciated the Buddhist image of Ingra's net. And this is an image around the threads of life across the universe. And at each point where those threads intersect, there's like a glistening bead that catches and reflects all the other lights. It's an image of interbeing. Imagine a spider's web on a dewy morning with the light hitting it, where it's glistening, shining, both fragile, beautiful, and strong. Father Greg Boyle, who is part of the community of Homeboy Industries, for former gang members, says this about this interconnectedness. One of his expressions is, no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. We're called to expand this sense of kinship, this circle of human concern, to be awake and aware of this interconnectedness, even as we listen and stay with ourselves. We need to remember that we belong to each other. Attentiveness and remembering this belonging often starts very close to home. Many years ago, I was part of a novena of grace with my dear friend, Father Gary Smith. The novena of grace is 9 days of prayer and reflection that's connected with the intentions of St. Francis Xavier. And it happens in Jesuit communities in many parts of the world. And this particular novena was in Spokane, and it has a long history of hosting the novena. There are 4 services a day, and hundreds of people come every day to this novena. And part of the ritual in these days is at the end of the prayer or the liturgy, people come forward with their prayer intention and receive a blessing. So Gary and I would be at the front of the church and receive people as they came forward, and we would only know them by their prayer, what their intention was they were holding during this time. And I still remember vividly, 30 years later, a family that was part of that novena. And it was a family that started the novena, must have been recently after the father had lost his job. And there were a couple children. And when the children came forward, their prayer at the beginning of the novena was that they could still go to Disneyland, that there were things that they were listing that they hoped could still happen. And over those 9 days, something changed in them. And their prayer, their intention at the end of that time was just that their dad would be okay. They let go of everything else, their long list of what they wanted, because they just wanted their dad to be okay. And they wanted to know how to support him. It was like that time they spent listening deeply. They let something crumble, and then they found what was secure in them. They really dug deep. I felt like in the narrow place they found themselves, and they didn't flee from that. And they let love find them, and they were found by love. And they responded with something deeper than what they thought they wanted. And I don't know what came of that family, but I feel like they were given something. They came into those 9 days perhaps wanting certain things and left, I think, with each other and with themselves. They stayed with their deeper longing together. They responded in love. Several years ago, I came across some really challenging words from Anthony DeMello about love and being awake. He says, everywhere in the world, people are in search of love. For everyone is convinced that love will save the world. Love alone can make life meaningful and worth living. But how very few understand what love really is and how it arises in the human heart. It is so frequently equated with a good feeling towards others, with benevolence or nonviolence or service. But these things in themselves are not love. Love springs from awareness. It is only inasmuch as you see someone as he or she really is here and now, and not as they are in your memory or your desire or your imagination or your projection, that you can truly love them. Otherwise, it's not the person you love, but the idea that you formed of this person, or this person as an object of your desire, and not as he or she is in themselves. It is in the act of seeing that love is born, or rather, more accurately, the act of seeing is love. I had actually hoped to have Jane and Carrie, some friends of mine, here to be able to share in this talk with me, and it just wasn't possible. We have been friends for many years in community. Jane communicates with her voice and with her pen, and Carrie communicates with her eyes. They are faithful friends on the journey, learning to see others over many years. Annually, our community makes a retreat. And one year when I wasn't able to make this retreat, Jane sent me a message. I wanted to share this with you because you missed the retreat where you would have seen it for yourself. Our theme was a place to belong, so I could see it in evidence. And so she wrote about this evidence in a poem called Grace After Meal for Carrie. You were arranged close to the table, fed each bit of cheese blintz, every drop of thickened coffee without choking, a victory. Your small frame becomes tall in the chair. Relaxed, you savor the room, noisy cutlery and conversations in cramped circles finishing breakfast. Some are your people, others strangers. A smile lifts your cheeks, remains. Without words, you claim us all, confirming the elegance of belonging. The elegance of belonging, evidence that the act of seeing is love. And I would invite us to consider, who are we seeing? Who are we not seeing? Who are we listening to? Whom do we ignore? Where do we give witness or find evidence of love and kinship? To be faithful on the journey is to see others not as what we need or want them to be, but as their true selves. Listening for the genuine in us, and also being willing to see the genuine in the other, beloved, all beloved. Where do we see evidence and take time to see others in the encounter? Do we encounter to meet others or to change them? I want to repeat the passage from Parker Palmer that I read on the first day of our retreat, and I shared again part of it on the third day. What are we sending from within ourselves out into the world? And I would add in community and relationship. And what impact is it having out there? And what is the world, community and relationship, sending back to us? And what impact is it having in here? We will be awakened to the fact that we co-create the reality we live in when we are conscious, or at least have faithful attempts to be conscious, of the interplay between ourselves and the world. There is a Talmudic saying that says, we see things not as they are, but we see them as we are. So it's important to take the time to see ourselves clearly, and then to look out into the world and be willing to see it clearly, and the many people and creation around us. Are we willing, in a world increasingly engaged in othering, to suspend judgment and turn to wonder, however uncomfortable that might make us? Again, to see ourselves and to know ourselves, and to continually listen for the genuine, and to be honest about what we hear in ourselves and how we engage in the world. I have found the ritual of foot washing that is part of many Christian traditions on Holy Thursday to be both consoling and comforting. We hear in Scripture that Peter wasn't too comfortable with it either. So if we're honest with ourselves, most of us aren't. It's one thing to observe, it's another to actually participate, to be received in kinship. It's a really humbling and vulnerable encounter, this touching of souls, like the soles of our feet. But I also think there's moments there where we actually can touch souls. We can connect in our kinship. The way I have experienced this in my own community of L'Arche has been evidence to me of kinship, of interbeing. Usually this would happen years ago in one of our homes, and we'd be in small circles, quite crowded, with bins of water, towels, laughter, tears. It's really quite messy, actually, and maybe not maybe what's seen in some of the churches. But it was a moment where here was this symbol of service and love and kinship. That was a symbol of what, in many ways, we were attempting to live and did our best to live every day, to care with and for each other. And it's messy. And both the ritual and our lives are testament to that. I had a friend who moved, who had experienced this in community and had moved to the East Coast and went on a Holy Thursday to look for a church community where she could participate in the foot washing. And she talked to me later and she said, the minister washed one person's feet, but we weren't part, the community wasn't part of that ritual. And that was a real loss for her. She didn't want to be just an observer. She wanted to touch and be engaged in the kinship. And don't we all? And don't we all? And yet we both lean in and pull back because it's uncomfortable and we certainly carry our fears. And I come back to Marilyn's, some words from Marilyn's prayer. Creator of the universe, we know that you are mystery beyond mystery, yet our finite minds and fragile fears often want to contain you in a way that keeps us comfortable. We resist stretching our beliefs. We hesitate to break from the past. And yet we're called to stretch, to break from illusion, and to at times be uncomfortable. I mentioned that I'm the Vice International Leader for L'Arche, and before I had this role, I had not traveled much. And frankly, I'm not doing much traveling now with COVID, but for my first couple years, I traveled a lot. And people said, do you love to travel? And I was like, well, I do it because it brings me to people, but it's not comfortable. And the places I travel are typically places where I know neither the language and often the culture. So I live in my travels often just outside my comfort zone. And I have come to make some peace with this because I'm also aware more and more as I engage in the world that most people live outside their comfort. And I actually have a choice about being in or out of my comfort zone. It's important to listen long enough to our discomfort to know if it's something we should move from or actually deeper into, if we are to listen to the genuine and also encounter people in a genuine way. In being faithful on the journey, we should expect discomfort and tension. The theologian Paul Tillich has noted, what is most characteristically human about us is the tension between the desire to be free, self-identifying and self-choosing, and our desire to be related, to be loved, to love, this interconnectedness. The call to kinship and community is not conformity, We're called to see and to claim our own inner ground and to respect the ground that is also holy for others. And I come back to the challenging words of Anthony DeMello. He continued to say about love and being awake. If it is love that you truly desire, then set out at once on the task of seeing. Take it seriously and look at everyone you dislike and really see your prejudice. Look at someone you cling to or something you cling to and really see the suffering, the futility, the unfreedom of clinging, and look long and lovingly at human faces and human behavior. Take time to gaze and wonder at nature, the flight of a bird, the dry leaf crumbling to dust, the flow of a river. As you do this, the hard protective shell around your heart will soften and melt, and your heart will become alive and sensitive and responsive. The darkness in your eyes will be dispelled, and your vision will become clear and penetrating, and you will at last know what love is. Being faithful on the journey is to stand on our inner ground and to stand in communion with others, with the discomfort and tension this may bring, to claim our place in belonging and interbeing. We're each called to bring our most authentic and imperfect selves into a world in need, bringing compassion and care for others with deep kindness and reverence for our own inner self. This poem of Anne Hillman speaks of our world at this time particularly, and also for this moment in retreat. We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers to a softer, more permeable aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death. For something new is being born in us if we but let it. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, learning to love. Trust that God has gifted you during this retreat and dwells in your inner earth and in the world around you encounter every day. The time you've taken for this retreat has hopefully brought moments of encouragement and nourishment, and even where you felt discomfort, stay with it. The seed of God is in you, and the seed of God wants to grow into God in you. Today and tomorrow, in these final days of retreats, in your moments, stay with the intention of listening, of staying long enough to hear what you're called to now, today. Continue to be patient with all that's unfinished in you. We're all on the way. We're all humans becoming. And we can really be an encouragement to each other on the journey. I close our time together, knowing that you have one more day on retreat, with the final prayer. Creator of the universe, we know that you are mystery beyond mystery, dwelling within and all around us. Our infinite minds and fragile fears often want to contain you in a way that keeps us comfortable. May we break past illusions and awaken to the life and love that you are calling us to in deep kinship and belonging to all of creation. Give us the quiet reassurance of your love and presence. Grant that we may pass through our days with faithful hearts and hear today and every day the whisper of our name and the name for all, beloved, beloved, beloved. Amen, and peace to all of you.